Hey everyone, this is Hajra, and you might know that I have a watercolor and wizardry YouTube painting channel, and I recently started a Twitch live stream painting channel as well, so hopefully you're here so we can do some painting live and also answer some art questions live, and I'm really excited about doing this. Last time we did a wonderful piece in an art journal right here, so let's get to the right page. And we didn't finish it, but we did a lot of the speckly granite texture of this vase, the marbleized texture down here, and we did some of the flowers and painting up here. So it was a lot of fun, and it was really exciting to be able to answer questions and talk to you guys live as well. So it was a very fun experience. Rather nerve-wracking, but really fun. So hopefully we can do the same sort of thing. And I will make sure to try to have a good sense of humor about stuff if it doesn't work out, but you'll just have to be gracious this time because again, this is very new to me, so we're just starting out, so hopefully it'll go well. So today we will be working on a wonderful Impressionist gouache study of the Eiffel Tower, and let me find my phone so I can show you. It's kind of visible. It's you can go Google it, it's for free. Online, you can get a copy of it on Wikipedia as well. So this is the Eiffel Tower piece. It was completed in 1889 by Georges Seurat. He was an amazing Impressionist painter. He also headed the neo-impressionist movement. So he started an amazing movement where he really had this mathematical way of applying dots, and Pointillism is one of the things that he sort of led as a movement. Other people were doing it, but he's the one who sort of really crystallized it. And we're going to be doing this piece recreated with gouache. He did this as an oil painting, so we will be doing it as a gouache painting. And if I see any questions in the chat room, I will be sure to try to answer them. I'm going to introduce my material. So I'm using a Fabriano Artistico watercolor paper. This is cold press. It's available in pads and blocks and also in postcards. And you can get these cool little postcard pads, and the great thing about them is that they're economical, but they let you test out the paper, and it's not studio grade. This is the artist grade paper, so it's a great way to test it out. So I have that paper right here, and I have drawn a sketch of the Eiffel Tower on here. And what I'm doing from that is it needs to be very loose because this is going to be a pointillism piece. And one of the reasons I wanted to do an Impressionist piece is I've been asked before numerous times to do an Impressionist piece because people want to know how to work opaquely in gouache without blending so it looks like oil or acrylic. And this is an original oil painting from the late 1800s. So we're going to try to emulate it in gouache, okay? And I have two references. The photo that I took at the museum shows prettier colors, so it all depends on when you Google it what colors you like better, because I didn't really like the colors on the Wikipedia reference. They were a little bit too bright, and the Impressionists worked much more in pastel colors that were muted and had a sort of like serene look to them. So there are a few different scans of this up on the internet, so choose the one that you like best for colors, or you can go ahead and change the colors and make them work better. So the only other things I have here are a water cup that I'm using to rinse my brush off in, and I have two brushes out. They're both synthetic brushes. I've got a filbert and I've got a round, and it's because I'm not going to be doing much detail work. I'm just going to be poking dots of color on here, and if I need to change a brush or get another brush, I will let you know. I also have my palette right here. This is a porcelain palette, and I usually have white on it typically, and this time I actually have also my colors on here because I didn't want to go and change palettes. I've also got a little dampen dish like I did last time, and I'm going to go ahead and dump my water on here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a little bit of water onto this gouache, and this gouache has been on this palette for more than a year, and it's still reusable. At some point I'm going to get rid of the white gouache, and probably if I don't finish it, because I did take out a lot at one time, and so I may not ever finish it, and it gets a little bit harder. It does reconstitute. It's watercolor. It's not acrylic or ink where you can't re-wet it, but depending on what brand you have, you do have problems re-wetting gouache, or it re-wets fine. So it depends on what brand you have. I think this is can't remember what brand it is right now, but it's not Schminke and it's not Winsor & Newton. It's one of the other brands, and I do believe that this brand re-wets pretty well, but it is an artist brand, but it's not Schminke. So I'm going to get a little bit of white just all mixed up here, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to just mix up some of this white and make it creamy before I start, and I've got to make sure to get it on my computer too because that's really helpful. And what I'm also going to do is make sure all my other colors are mixed up. All those other colors look pretty soft. I don't think I really have to worry about that. And I have a washcloth next to me right here where I can meter the water in my brush. I have a half-size brush right here that started out long, and I cut it down because I wanted to put it in a travel set. So you can always do that for a longer brush if it doesn't come in a particular type for travel. You can always saw it down. Depends on whether or not it's something that it's easy for you to do. I broke that down and then I sandpapered it, but if it was a wider brush, I don't necessarily know that I would have been able to. So I got 4 colors out. I try to operate in limited color schemes because if you use too many colors, you lose mood, and Impressionism really is about mood. Now, in fact, I probably should only use one of these reds, and I couldn't make up my mind if I wanted to make it a warmer triad or a cooler triad. So I think I'll decide once we get started. So if you're starting out with me, to make sure you have all of your colors wet out just like I have so that you don't try to re-wet them. So if you're working in pans, make sure you go ahead and wet your pans with a dropper or a sprayer or mister or with a little spoon so that you don't have to dig into them with your Now let's assess this. The background is light and it comes into a darker, so let's start with the background first. So I'm going to go ahead and lay a white down initially because I just feel like it will give my paper a little bit of catch for the rest of those colors and make them more pastel on its own. Because the Impressionists didn't do very much color mixing on their palette, they did a lot of it on the canvas where they just put the colors next to each other and they used what was called optical mixing. And it's also called chromoluminarism. And what that does is that the colors sort of sit next to each other in little dots or blocks or tiles or squares, and you end up having a wonderful tile effect. Some of them had them overlap, like George Seurat, and others used more of a next to each other effect, like Paul Signac. And so it all depends on who the artist was. I don't know what my live stream schedule is going to be quite yet, but I think I'm probably going to stream at least once or twice a week. Hi to everybody, it's nice to see you here. To Crazy Graphics. These are exactly the kind of paintings where when you get far away, they look normal, but when you get close up, you see all sorts of cool, crazy dots and stuff. And Monet, he was one of the Impressionist painters, and he did a lot of sort of dabs and splotches. And Georges Seurat did these amazing mathematical dots, and he's really famous for a painting called Sunday Afternoon on the Grand Island of La Jette, I think. And he is a 10-foot painting that he completed over 2 years, an amazingly large painting, but he was really famous for it. It's become one of the it launched the neo-impressionist movement, which is you use a lot of these abstract things of pointillism and pastels and not realistic blending, but the pointillism that he did became really famous after that, which is this exact mathematical, logical pointillism. And so when you get close up, you see, maybe you can even see on the phone, but when I zoom in here for this Eiffel Tower, you can see all of these dots that he's put into here. But when you get further away, they sort of blend into the Eiffel Tower brown colors and copper colors. And up here you see the sky, but the sky itself is not blue or even a blend of different colors that would make blues and whites. It's actually just blue splotches and green splotches and yellow splotches and some red splotches. And when you zoom out, you see the effect looks like a warmish blue sky. So yeah, that's exactly what Impressionism is. It's about, basically, I mean, if you use part of the name, it's giving you an impression of something without being too realistic, and also using the word Impressionism as the actual term, is it's supposed to make you feel something. So that's why they used pastels, and that's why they used a very particular round of color schemes, is because they wanted to evoke some emotive feeling. So if you didn't feel something, then it probably wasn't an Impressionist piece, because they were really going for making you feel something because of the colors. So you would sort of feel romantic or idealistic or whimsical because you see all these lights. And what it does with dotting the colors down is that when you back up, your eyes optically mix that color. So that's one effect it has. The other effect it has is it makes it really sparkly. So you have like this sparkly, fake sparkly look without any kind of metallic stuff, without any kind of glass or anything like that, but it gives you sort of a luminous, vibrating quality. And that's the word that they used, is they wanted the colors to look luminous and they wanted the colors to vibrate. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to start in with pointillism. And this might be too long a brush for the pointillism effect. So if it's too long, I'll go get something that I can stipple with better, because that's the other word for pointillism, is stippling. And you can buy stipplers, but they're usually smaller. Or you can buy a deer foot brush too. It sort of has like a round, compact look to it. So I'm going to start with some blue, trying to make it very opaque. So I'm going to actually go right into adding, and this is gouache, so this should come opaque. If you didn't get it opaque, then something happened and you need to go back to the store and say, I bought gouache, not watercolor. So, and I see the sky, so I'm going to start putting down a lot of dots. Now, of course, you can kind of cheat, because what you can do is, if I wanted to, I could lay down all blue or all white, a light white blue, and then come back and add dots on top. And you can certainly do that. I might even do that myself, because I'm doing a study of his piece. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm entering this into a pointillism contest where I absolutely have to do it. And it also doesn't matter what size the dots are in the sky at this point, because I'm going to cover them up with other dots. So I just want to get a section of the sky going. And he also did these really precise dots. You can make them fatter, it doesn't matter. And I'm also going to make them bluer where I feel like he made them bluer. So I feel like coming up to the top, he had bluer dots. So a little bit less white, a little bit more blue. And just keep going with that. And as I'm doing this, because this is a little bit mindless, let me give you a little bit more information, which is that, again, this is a neo-impressionist study, because it was the movement that was started during Impressionism by Georges Seurat, by doing his amazing Sunday afternoon piece with the exact mathematical precision of his pointillism technique, which really took off after he did it, because before that people weren't using exact dots. They might have been using squares or splotches. Also, this piece was completed in 1889. It's called the Eiffel Tower. And it was, the Eiffel Tower itself was being built at the time when he did this painting. So this painting was done when the Eiffel Tower was not complete. So when you see in his painting the Eiffel Tower fade off at the top there, it's not because he decided to be impressionistic. It's because he was actually signaling that there was nothing else left up there. The tower was not finished. So that's an unfinished tower in real life that he was painting. And that to me is kind of amazing, because the Eiffel Tower is amazing and famous and iconic as far as French symbols go, and he was alive while it was being built, and he was alive and painted it before it was finished. And of course, this piece is a legacy of him, and it's kind of sad actually, because his pieces were really famous. Sunday Afternoon and the Eiffel Tower and a handful of other pieces he did that were beautiful landscapes. And what ended up happening with him, of course, was that he died of some kind of strange infection, some disease that he had, and they don't know if it was pneumonia or like tuberculosis or who knows what, but he died of it at the age of 31. So he left an amazing legacy of paintings, but he did not live very long. You know, at 31, he was very, very young. You know, could have, as an artist, had a huge number of years ahead of him where he could have done so much more, especially because he was a leader of an amazing new movement at the beginning of the century. But he had a son that died 2 weeks later of the same infection that he had, whatever lung infection or something that he had. And he had his wife was pregnant. His wife Madeline was pregnant with a second child that also died after it was born. So he doesn't have any legacy in his children or family, but he does have an amazing legacy of art, which I think if you're an artist, you can be very proud of. I mean, he's left more behind, I think, than lots of people who had like 10 or 15 kids. And he was such an amazingly talented guy, too, because, see, the thing is, during his time, all of his color theory stuff was new. So we take color theory and color schemes and mood and all the stuff that we use now in movies or digital art and in animation, take it for granted. And it was not for free when he was around. It was just coming out, and Newton had discovered some time before stuff to do with spectral colors and optics and colors, and he had devised a certain amount of color palette in a color wheel, and then other people during this time were doing it during after Newton and during Seurat's time. And so these Impressionists were really influenced by, I've changed to my filbert because it's more of a stumpy brush. So I feel like I can put the dots down with more sort of gusto. I can change back to the other one. But you can see that it lets me do that. So what I'm going to do now while I'm doing this is I'm going to actually see that I see a little bit of white. I see a lot of white. So before I go in with my yellow, when you're doing pointillism, if you're working in oil or acrylic, it's best if you wait till the other layers are dry. And if you're not going to wait till they're dry, gouache dries pretty quick, so I can come in and dab. But work from clean to muddy colors, or from cool to warm colors, or from light to dark colors. Do all of those, because if you end up mixing the yellow with this blue, it'll make green. And he doesn't have a green sky. He has a somewhat luminous yellowness to the sky that is showing up because he's optically mixing that yellow at a distance with the blue and white dots. So I want to make sure all of these dots are in there, and it can have a pretty realistic effect. In fact, if you're doing a realism painting, don't be afraid to use stippling or pointillism. We showed how we could do a granite technique with it. Well, you could do lots of other techniques too. If you were doing the splotchy skin of a reptile, or you were doing some kind of eggs of some sort in nature, or a rock that had all this texture, the pointillism technique is great for that too. I mean, this painting is all pointillism, but there can be plenty of paintings where you just use pointillism as a part of it. And you can also do a huge amount of refining to this with the different layers. So what's going to end up happening is I'll do whatever I can do for the stream, and I'm going to be streaming for probably an hour and a half today and try to get as much as I can done. And then I'm going to go ahead and complete this later on if I don't finish. But I will show you the finished product later, because what that'll do for you is that you will see what I did maybe to refine it when I wasn't there, and you can ask me some questions, you know. I don't want you to feel like there's any steps that are important that were skipped that you didn't get to see. You know what I'm saying? So yes, you can definitely do this style with watercolor. This style can be done with watercolor, gouache, ink, acrylic, and oil. The difference is when you do this with watercolor and you do it with ink, it'll be transparent and you will see more of the colors through each other. So you have to be careful about the distance between the dots, or maybe just picking colors that you don't mind mixing, because that's perfectly reasonable. But if you do it with acrylic and you use it at a consistency that's not thinned down to watercolor, it'll be opaque dots. And if you're doing it with gouache like I am now, again, it'll be opaque. So the good thing about that is when I lay dots on top of each other or next to each other, I can completely cover the color underneath if I wanted to. And it gives me a nice coverage. So, but definitely pointillism has been done beautifully with watercolor and with inks as well. And you just get a more transparent glazing effect. In fact, it makes it look like you almost sort of spray glazed it, if that makes any sense. Because a glaze is kind of a transparent wash that you put down, and then you wait for it to dry and you put down another wash over it, and it'll give you nice sort of stained glass sheets of color that you can see the other colors through. If you do speckling, you'll just get, instead of a smooth glaze effect, you'll get like a speckled glaze effect, because those colors will still be transparent and mixed. So it'll just be another kind of pointillism and mixing. All of them acceptable. So there's nothing wrong with that. You can do it with ballpoint pen. Yes, you can do it with a pen, you can do it with a marker, and you can also, with acrylics, you would do it the exact same way that you're doing it, that I'm doing it with gouache. You'd make sure you have sort of a creamy, opaque-ish consistency, kind of. If it's liquid acrylics, that you would be the consistency it comes out of the bottle. If it's tube acrylics, then it's going to be a little bit thinner, so that it's like the consistency of a liquid acrylics. And then you can go ahead and add these dots, and you can go ahead and thin the acrylic down also and make it so that you are using it very thin as well, and then it would just be done with, then it would look like you were doing it in watercolor or in ink. So acrylic is versatile that way. You can water it down and thicken it up. And in fact, with watercolor and with gouache, you could do the same thing. If I thinned this gouache down a lot, it would look like I was doing it with watercolor, because gouache is just opaque watercolor, and once I add enough water, it'll end up looking like the opaque paint has gone transparent. So, and I'm trying to make sure they don't run. I am actually getting, in some places, a splotchy effect, because I didn't care about the dots overlapping, and that's perfectly fine. And you can see at the top of this painting, because the tower wasn't finished, it's fading off. So I do want to come in with some blue here, and what I can do is the little yellow and russet colors that I see that are the tower, I can go ahead and pop those back in later. And this might look like from a distance to you guys, or if somebody just shows up, that I have done something other than dots, but this is all dots. And it's a really cool effect because what ends up happening is I have the separate colors on the palette and they mix on here, and that's the optical mixing part of it. And you can see that for any of these pointillism pieces, is that even when they're done in ink, they can be really detailed, and the ink dot is so tiny that even close up, they look pretty detailed and pretty fixed. But for paint dots, the dots are pretty big. So, you know, it can... What you want to do yourself, actually, is once you're working on something like this, back up from this. I'm going to do that definitely few times, like just with my head, and also back up after I'm done painting so I can look into if my values are right. Yeah, you can go ahead and thin down acrylic with water, and you can also thin it down with matte medium or gloss medium. I would use matte medium because it doesn't change the finish of the acrylic, and you can then, like a Liquitex matte medium is very good, it's archival, and what it does is it thins down the acrylic color, extends the acrylic paint. For if you add just a little bit of it into the acrylic paint, it'll first be an extender, which is it makes the paint go further, and it just makes more paint basically without making the color any different. And then if you add more than that to it, it'll end up becoming a paint thinner, and you can use that to thin your paint instead of water. And you can use regular old water, but if you use the matte medium, the benefits of that is that it makes it so that the acrylic still binds to your canvas as readily as when it started out 100% acrylic. Because if you thin it down to water, you can thin it down a fair amount, but if you thin it down too much, it won't stick to the canvas anymore because you're making the plastic polymer less and less every time you add more water into it, so you will lose the polymer after a particular amount, and your paint might flake off the canvas. So if you want to keep your paint just as plasticky and gluey, then you want to use a matte medium. But if you want to thin it down with water, it does work to a large amount. I mean, especially if you're painting on paper, you shouldn't have a problem. But if you're painting on a canvas, or if you're painting on wood, or if you're painting on metal, some other surface other than paper, because paper has its own sort of absorbent tooth. But if you're not working on something that has that kind of absorbent tooth, then you want to use the acrylic matte medium instead. Any kind of pen you can get your hand on, any kind of marker, any kind of anything, you can do pointillism with it. So if you have your cheap markers or your Copics markers, although I would recommend that you don't jab your tip, just like with the brush, I'm using more of my side, and it's not making perfect dots, but it's just because our friend Georges was using acrylic or oil brushes, so he was painting in oil, and he had bristle brushes, and he could dot them down and not really ruin their tip as much. If you're using a nylon watercolor brush or a sable watercolor brush especially, you don't want to jab it down on its tip, so lean it over on its side like I am here a little bit and do that with it. That way you don't splay out its tip. And like I said, if you buy a stippler brush or a deerfoot brush, then you can go ahead and stipple right off on the tip. I do have a deerfoot in there. I might go and get it because I think it might actually work for the larger spots of this, but I'm worried that I'll lose all of his little dots, so I just don't want to lose his dots. I think they're so pretty. I don't know how his period for doing this painting, but remember his other painting, he did it over a period of 2 years, so he probably gave ample time for these colors to dry in between. He wasn't doing all of this alla prima, which is like he didn't sit down and do it all at once, because I'm pretty sure that oil would have just blended right in. He could have probably done a little bit of it alla prima, but I don't think he could have done much of it if he was keeping all those dots in oil, because oil is even more squishy and slippery when it's wet, and it stays wet a lot longer than watercolor or gouache. So, but you know, it's a nice peaceful technique. It's one of the reasons why I chose it for my second live stream, is because I said this last time too, is I do a lot of realism pieces, and then oops, I almost stroked there. Did you see that? I was starting to stroke. No stroking, just dabs and pokes, stippling, pointillism. This is also called divisionism, by the way, because you're dividing up your colors. But Seurat preferred the term chromoluminarism because Well, why wouldn't you? I mean, one sounds like it's awesome, the other one sounds like it's racist. So this is all about making your colors luminous, and the other one's about dividing things up, which doesn't sound so nice. So, got that going, and this is 140 pound paper. So, you can get a 300 pound paper, but I've found that, and you can go 90 pound is fine too if the Arches makes a really thin 90 pound, and so do some of their watercolor companies. You know, with stippling, I'll be honest, you can go pretty thin. You could even do cardstock or Bristol because you're using not that much water. You know, I'm coming in here with relatively thick paint. It doesn't matter even if I'm doing watercolor or ink. It's little teeny dabs of it, so because I'm not washing a huge amount of water everywhere, it doesn't matter what I'm using, acrylic, oil, ink, watercolor, you can go with pretty thin paper. It's one of those techniques that's kind of friendly for any number of different approaches. So, and this is bluer down here, and I don't want it bluer down here, so I'm going to go ahead and dab lighter whites down here. Now, this might look like it's an easy piece, but it's going to take a long time, so I don't know that we'll get all of it done. I think what I'll try to do is get some of the tower done, and then get some of the sky done and some of the down done, because I don't want you to feel like that some part was done differently, even though it's all pointillism. There are different decisions that we're making as far as warm and cool, near and far, and colors, so I just want to make sure that you're there for those parts of it. Now, my brush is getting a little bit dabby in a wider way down here, so I don't see my dots as much. It's probably also because I put my dots so close together that they are overlapping and turning into a mushy mess. But you saw it, it was recorded. I was dabbing, not stroking. See, dark blue down here. You can see these beautiful yellows that he has in there. We have to wait for those till this is completely dry and until we've decided that we don't want too much more blue. I mean, I can always go in and dab in a little bit, but once I've got the yellow in there, the orange, light yellow orange color, it's going to be a little bit muddy inducing to do that because this isn't oil, it's not acrylic, it's not drying permanently. So if I go and put the yellow in, I can make it muddy if I don't make it one of my last touches. So this is one of the reasons why maybe ink, which dries permanently, or acrylic and oil, which dry permanently, are an easier choice, but acrylic takes a little bit longer to dry than gouache, and oil takes much longer to dry than gouache. So the good thing about using gouache is that you can get the same opaque look if you're just careful about how you mix and blend without any of the drying time and frankly without any of the chemicals. So I feel like there's a much more luminous white area there with the gouache, and he doesn't have that. I like it, but he tends to have much more of an even blue, so I think we might have to go back at some point. Might even do a little bit now. I have a lot of painters in this movement. Another painter that's worth checking out is Paul Signac. He was also a neo-impressionist, and I believe he was a contemporary of Seurat. And he did some amazing pieces of ports and ships and landscapes and beaches. We might do a piece not on my Twitch stream, but on my YouTube channel as a separate video of one of Signac's pieces, so you can see the kind of stuff that he was doing. And he used much more squarish mosaic-like tiles, and he wrote some books on his technique too, because he lived to be like 70 something, so he was able to share his technique and tips and books that he ended up writing later. So you can see I'm muting down this white. If I leave too much white there and I don't really see it to that extent in his sky, it calls a lot of attention to itself. So unless you want that attention, don't leave something super white or super black. We don't have black, but what I mean by black is my darkest darks. So I don't have any of those darkest darks down, so right now I'm mainly looking to see if my whites are not clashing with the rest of the sky, because he doesn't really have a cloud sky. It really is just a multicolored blue sky showing the city lights and showing the sky and some of the warmth in it. So I don't see very many clouds, so I think that I want to make sure I don't leave a huge amount of just white there. And pointillism does get repetitive, but if you enjoy doing something relaxing that's giving you a pretty result, I mean, if you like coloring or painting in general, you'll probably find this relaxing. Now, if you find poking a huge amount of dots to be terribly cumbersome, then this is not the technique for you. You should try to do it more in washes or glazes and I really enjoy it every now and again. Definitely could not do it for every paint. If I overlap the dark tower into the sky, towers don't have lumps and bumps on them. They're a straight line, and it's a darker color, so I want to make sure I do the sky first. I think you can see a pretty good image of this on the screen right now. And what I wanted to show you is that this is a wonderful letter A composition. Okay, so what that means is that you want to look at your layout and composition when you're making your own piece, but when you're looking at a master's piece, you want to see what did they use, why did they use it, why does it work. And typically they'll be using stuff like the golden mean, or they'll be using famous layouts that typically work, and they all have certain geometric patterns and harmonies that work out. In this case, you see a letter A composition, which happens naturally with the Eiffel Tower, but there's lots of times where people will stand a person this way, or stand buildings this way, or two people stretched out, or, it doesn't matter, animals, something, but it'll form a letter A. So it's a very strong composition to have a letter A composition. And in general, let me give you a tip. It's actually something I read a long time ago in one of my old books by Andrew Loomis, and he talked about how if you were having trouble figuring out any kind of layout problems, then one of the things you can do is just go back to your ABCs. And what he meant by that was all the letters in the alphabet are these ancient images that have been refined for centuries. So actually, if you are stuck for a layout and you don't know what would make a good composition when you're working on a piece, then you can just use the letter A or the letter B or the letter C. All of those letters from A through Z are amazing compositions, and you can make them work for you when you're out of ideas about where to start. So just start with a simple shape to give you the idea of the letter, and then work your composition into a general shape that reflects that, and you'll end up with a beautiful composition. Okay, this is in the glare. Let me move this so that it's not in the glare. So apart from being a letter A composition, which is what I was explaining, this is also a nearly symmetrical piece. It's a little bit asymmetrical, however, because typically, so let me explain both. If you have a symmetrical piece, it's usually iconic. You want the attention to stay at the center, like a painting of Jesus or Mary or some other monarch or portrait. You usually center the person. That's because you want the attention to be right on the center. For all other compositions, you typically want to go for some other balance so your eye moves around the piece so you don't get stuck in the middle there and then just leave. You want to be able to look at the rest of the piece as well and not just have the attention on the center. So what you're going to do for a piece like this, which is actually almost like a portrait of this tower, is it's perfectly okay to put him right in the center because it's kind of a portrait of this tower, and that's why he did that. Now, if the tower wasn't the focal point and maybe Seurat wanted to have like the bridge in front of it or the streets or the buildings or something else or the whole landscape to be something looked at, maybe he would have made the tower much smaller and over off to 1/3 of the side and then made it a longer landscape, like made it horizontal instead of vertical, and done other things to make it so that your eye moved around the piece and didn't just stick to the tower. So I hope that makes sense, which is that he wanted you to look at the tower and mostly at the tower, so he put it nearly center, okay? If you wanted your eye to move around more, then he would have made it so that you weren't just looking at the tower and made it so that the tower was off center, usually like 1/3 off into 1/3 center based off of the golden mean, okay? And the other thing I wanted to point out was you have this foliage, which you're gonna end up putting in later, that makes it a little bit asymmetrical. Also, this building bulge right here also helps make it a little bit asymmetrical. This diagonal makes it a little bit asymmetrical. So even here, he was trying not to make it so boring, even though he was working on a symmetrical piece, because he didn't want you to just look at it and be like bored to death. All of these things actually create interest. And I also want to show you how you have a visual plane going through this. So what's the darkest dark? It's right here. What's the lightest light? It's right here. So you're going to look right here. And then after that, your eye travels up the tower. It disappears. You see this, you're interested, you come back down around. You go down this diagonal. You hit this roadblock instead of going right off the piece. He's blocked it with this. Then you end up right back into the focal point and looking around. So it's almost guaranteed that you'll look at this piece a few times for a few minutes before you move on. If you hadn't done some of those things, then you would have lost interest and moved on. And it seems like it's arbitrary, but it's not. It's either a subconscious decision on the artist's part or a very obvious conscious decision. Let's go on to the tower side. Now what I see here is I see yellows and I see reds and I see blues. So I think the smart thing to do is to make sure I don't make my colors muddy. And so again, I'm going to start with the yellows first, and then after that let's go in with our reds, and then let's go in with our blues. Okay, so it looks like the tower is a rusty color, It's almost sort of Golden Gate Bridge colored in this painting, but it's not really copper. If you get close up, there's a lot of oranges, light orange and red and blue dots that are mixing to make it that way. So, and this is where I felt like I need a, last time you were like, should you use a bigger brush? This time I need a smaller brush for this area. And just some dots. It is funny how it does blend together. So, and it looks more yellow, but that's because I have not put the other colors down. And so I have to make sure that I don't really have to leave space for them because they can overlap right over the dry color. The only thing I'm worried about is the sky. So at this point I'm just going to go right in with that. I don't really care if it's overlapping later on. So Seurat was a little bit of a paradox as an impressionist because he did have this mathematical precision in how he did his dots, and I'm definitely not doing it to that degree because I'm not doing a huge painting. So if I had a huge painting, I could get dots in the size that I'm putting in right now, and they'd look really like much more on a larger canvas, more like you play with ink and dots on paper, right? So don't see very much yellow down here, but just a little bit. Almost using the gouache dry brush is what I'm doing here, because it's not that different. You know, if you go ahead and make the gouache pretty thick and you lay it down in dots, this is actually a botanical painter's technique to finish up botanical realistic watercolor flowers, is that you go in and you make little teeny lines or you make little teeny dots in the shadow areas because you don't want to re-wet the whole thing. It works really well as a dry brush realism technique, even though we're using it here as an impressionist technique. So whether you're a botanical painter, impressionist painter, or just a straight out mainstream watercolorist that does a little bit of everything, you can use pointillism. So I don't know how high I want to go before I throw in the blue. I'm a little bit worried that that blue will turn into a green, so I'm going to come back and do a little bit of the blue in between the tower areas, just right there. That's how specks that show up in between two bigger, darker shapes. That's what the sky looks like in between them. It looks bluer for some reason. Keep doing my little stippling. It's very peaceful. Nice little blue dots. Seems like most of this painting is blue, actually, if you look at it. There's a little bit of blue in every area. And that way, the Impressionists were also really good at color harmony because they were doing it much more sort of overtly, where they went ahead and threw in colors that optically mixed everywhere. But you want to do that as any kind of painter. You want to make sure if you have a color in some part of the painting that it shows up in other parts of the painting. Otherwise, you have these colors that look more jarring and out of place. So what Impressionism really was a mix of science and feeling. So you got the scientific interpretation of color theory and optical color mixing, color palettes, light and color, divisionism, chromo-luminarism. Then you have the feeling part of it, which is the idealism, the romanticism, the beautiful feelings that you get when you see something that is made out of a sparkly, stippled, modeled look that is in a limited color scheme. It really has an amazing feeling that you have. I'm going to go ahead and do this while I'm loaded up here. The optical mixing, you can make it so you never mix a green, and you only do the yellow and blue on here and they turn into a green, but you'd have to do a lot of overlapping. Or you could make greens. I can see some greens in his painting just down here. I mean, they're real greens, they're not optically mixed. So he did mix, obviously, some greens, but when you see it, it's not just one color of green, it's like green with a little bit of yellow, and along with that there's some orange and there's a little bit of blue around it. So it's not like he never mixed these colors, it's that he was using a lot of multicolored areas. And if you want to give something an impressionist look, you also want to make sure that you make it so it stays in the pastels, which means that you have a lot of white added into your colors. I mean, I haven't done a dedicated pointillism piece in a long time, unless it's been in ink. I've done ink pointillism. But in paint, it can be rather trying on your patience because what you want to do is the ink dries immediately and it's only one color, whereas with the paint, you'll want to keep coming back. The reason this gets slower is I'm talking to you guys, and then I'm also making these choices that I would in my head. Instead, I have to remind myself to talk, and then the talking slows down my choices. So that glare is catching up to me again. It hates me. So I've gone closer to the wall now, and eventually we're going to make it so that this corner is the darkest, and next to it, the little building impression is the lightest. Now, if you're painting with gouache, one of the things you'll notice is that it works very creamy and velvety. It doesn't have a plasticky feel that I was talking about last time. You'll probably hear me say this over and over again. And this is because most people are familiar with acrylic, but they're not familiar with gouache. And that is the difference if you use acrylic versus gouache, is that the gouache is going to go down in a much more smooth, it feels very silky and velvety. You know, it feels creamy basically because it has like that pigment cream in it, so it feels like you're applying some kind of really creamy thing. With acrylic, it has like that shininess to it that comes with the acrylic plastic, and it travels through to the actual way that you're putting the acrylic down. And one of the other reasons I like to do smaller scale paintings is that you can see the whole piece while I'm working on it, instead of the live stream camera. It's not really conducive to changing zooms and doing that all the time. I can zoom out more, but it doesn't zoom in much more, so I try to make sure I don't really have pieces where I do that too much. And this is definitely the kind of piece that you can follow along with, because a lot of other pieces take more prep and more help with the actual sketch underneath it, but this sketch is really easy, so just do a little tower thing, find the reference on Wikipedia or through a Google search. It's a free image now. You can do your own version of it. You could even sell your own version of it if you did it, because it's out of copyright by now. And if you do your own take on it, do something cool. So you can see what's happening here is I finally come up to the sky area here, and I'm adding a dab here and there of the tower. And you can see how I can just do that opaquely right on top of it, and it completely covers up the blue underneath it. If this was watercolor, this would not be happening. I would have a mix of the blue and the red, and it would give me more of a purple. And even with this, where I end up having a dab that's a little bit more transparent, that's watered down, you'll see that, but you can always cover it right up because it's gouache. So that's why it's a great tool for opaque painting. But the great thing about it lifting up is we're not going to be doing it in this painting, because remember, Impressionism is like sort of anti-blending rendering, right? So if you want to render with the dots. There's no blending going on, but you can blend really easily with gouache. All you need is a damp brush, and you can start making these amazing blends with it. So, and that can happen even after it dries, unlike with acrylic and with oil, which once they're dry, they're dry. It's all over. So. And realism isn't always the best look. As much as I like realism, and I like doing a lot of realism, you'll find that there's a lot more style, and that's why you call it stylized painting versus realism painting. But there's a lot more style in all the other looks, because what ends up happening is that you can basically make somebody see the Eiffel Tower for the first time all over again if you do it in this cool stylized way. And if you just took a photograph and showed the same photograph to everybody, it wouldn't be very appealing, but if you do it in different color schemes and you do different looks to it, it just has this amazing thing to it. Well, I don't think Loomis made up the composition as letters thing, but I did read about it in Loomis's book at some point when I was younger, and he wrote that book way before any of us were ever born. Like, he wrote his books a while back, but I'm sure somebody said it before him. He was not the first person to say letters make good compositional stuff, because when he stated it, he didn't say, I, Andrew Loomis, have come up with this amazing technique. He did say, you know, great idea for compositions is looking at your alphabet. So he said that very matter-of-factly, so I'm pretty sure he learned that from some of his teachers at art school, and they learned it from other people. And it kind of makes sense, you know, because letters and calligraphy and all this stuff, it all goes hand in hand, doesn't it, with all of this art, you know, because calligraphy is its own art. In a lot of countries, it's a majority of the art, like Arabic calligraphy, but you end up having a huge calligraphy tradition in medieval Europe, and also in Western culture for a while. There was a huge amount of calligraphy and hand lettering being done. So it all depends on where you're going, what you're doing, but calligraphy is its own art, you know. So these towers, there's a lot of lines on here that are just blown out by a few of the blue lines. So I don't want them going straight through. So I'm going to come back and do the same thing with this blue and white, as I'm going to go ahead and patch in to some of those areas because I don't want to see that. I just put it in there because I want it as an under thing. And here's an example of where I'm doing the lighter color over the top of the darker color, and it is going to take more effort to cover it up, but because it's opaque blue paint, it'll cover it up. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to talk about digital because I'm strictly a traditional painter, and definitely am young enough and grew up in the era of digital painting. So I definitely could have become a digital painter, but I didn't want to sacrifice the sort of, I was saying this last time, the primitive raw energy you get from having wet paints and a brush and everything. And a part of it, I've seen digital painters paint and instructional videos and such, and you see them constantly saying stuff like, well, I did this scan and I'm going to put this scan in the background so I can throw in some organic texture, or I'm going to do a gradient so it throws in some organic, you know, shading and whatever it is. So they're constantly trying to make it look more handmade, because if it looks too not handmade, it's not as complex and pretty, where you get all this stuff naturally with air and water and paint helping you, and also your own hand being organic and not you know, a computer fill. It does these amazing things for you that I feel like personally that you can never touch traditional art, and all the best traditional artists, it doesn't matter what they're doing. Realism, Impressionism, calligraphy, it doesn't matter. Anything, it'll be better than a digital painter. Not to say there aren't some amazingly talented digital painters out there, but I'm pretty sure that the best digital painters also do some traditional painting. I don't think that they just do digital painting, so. And if they don't, then I think they might be missing out on something. So here's me telling them that they should maybe do some traditional painting on the side. Oh yeah, definitely. I totally agree. All those endless undos and endless redos that you get in digital, those will be something that keeps you at a peace maybe forever. You know how you have that feeling where you have to call something done? Like, you just have to call it done, and you have to commit. You know, those two words, like commitment and calling it done, get to be really hard, not just in relationships, but also in digital painting, because you're sitting there and you're saying, well, I have to undo, or I can make this even better. You know, I can sit here and make it, you know, work on this, but you have to come to a point. And I think as a traditional painter, we're trained to come to that point, which is, I have to commit to this decision and then move on. And maybe you'll come back and look at it tomorrow or a week after, or even a few weeks after, maybe months after, and change something. But if you're working on deadline, or even if you have some personal goals where you want to get a lot of stuff done, you want to be able to move on. And you cannot move on sometimes. I mean, it depends on the kind of personality you have. I think if it was my personality and I was doing digital painting, I would just keep hitting the undo button and also say that I needed more time to get more stuff done, because I could always make this better. And then the other problem is that I don't know about your drafting skills or your rendering skills, but I definitely think that they suffer if you're doing it digital, because in the digital part of it, it does the drafting for you, and it also does the a lot of the fills for you. So I think that your hand is trained. You can train your hand to do some shading, coloring, rendering, perspective, lines, you know, all the stuff that you do that it makes your hand steady and trained to work in a particular manner. If you join this later, you'll know that this itself was like 3 or 4 layers. So, and we're just doing this dry brush Pointillism that is Impressionist, and we're doing a study of Georges Seurat's The Eiffel Tower from 1889, and the reason the tower is fading off is because the tower wasn't done when he was painting it in 1889, so he painted an unfinished tower, and so will we. And we are not mixing our colors as much. We are applying them on here and getting the optical mixing from chromoluminescence, which is a result of pointillism and dots, mixing the colors as you back up away from it. For those of you who wonder if you can re-wet gouache, you can see it happening right now. I'm re-wetting it, and it's working. It's not oil or acrylic. You can definitely re-wet it. I'm going to come in with a lot of dots, and they look even keeled, but I'm going to come back in and make them not so even keeled with some white. So I'm just going to throw them in first, okay? So it looks like they're very even, and like I don't have any sense of sort of like, they're not Christmas lights, so we don't want to leave them like Christmas lights. Keep in mind that I'm working very tiny though, so when I'm trying to put them on either side of his pole that he did, that's going to be harder for me, because for me the either side of the pole is really tiny. So, and I did that so I could get through more of this for this stream, but I would advise that you do the same if you're spending money on artist gouache. Try to take out as much color as you need, and in a situation like this, when you get out more, then you can go ahead and that, by the way, again, is pans. I've actually used pans, wet them, and scooped them out with a palette knife. Those are not tube colors, but they work just like tube colors. So you can see what I did with this line. It looks very dark on screen. You can't really zoom in, but it's not the red and the blue mixed. It's the red and the blue next to each other, and they've gone purple, but just to you guys, close up, it still looks red and blue to me. I've done the blue around it. And come back over here, and I'm going to come back with some white on top of them, because I see some, it's all about observation, even for something that's not realistic. If you're trying to do a study, you've studied it more by painting it for an hour and a half than you ever could have if you looked at it in a book or in a museum or anything. You've gotten closer to it and reimagined it than anybody can when they're just looking. So even if you don't finish a piece, that's why it's called a study, is because you're not necessarily finishing it, but even if you're just doing a part of a piece, you learn so much more. And if you do it not realistically, then like I was saying before, you're giving somebody the opportunity to see a tree or a tower or a person or an animal again for the very first time with fresh eyes, you know, with eyes that they could not have seen, you know, with eyes that are your eyes and also your hand's eyes. So these two things together that you couldn't have gotten if they were just looking at a photograph. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start putting in the darker red dots. And this is a little bit watery for what I wanted. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that sky is white and a few different mixes of blue. And we're actually going to go back now that it's dry and throw in some orange into it and some yellow into it, because that's what Seurat had in his original painting from 1889. So this is, we were trying to do a study of his piece, so he puts yellow in his sky, we put yellow in our sky. Now, of course, if you just mix yellow with the blue, it'll make green, but because we're doing it with these stippling, pointillism, divisionism, chromoluminarism type stuff, everything that I was discussing before, then what you end up having is this lovely sky that looks like it has a little bit of yellow lights in some section, instead of it looking like a green sky. So, and see, so this red that I'm putting down here, I'm going to wait till it dries completely before I come back and do the blue that I see here. So while this is resting, we can go back to that sky and finally add that yellow so we can see what that looks like. Okay, and the goal here is to get it as close to his study as possible, not because I'm doing this as a forgery and I'm going to sell it anywhere, but because I want to get inside of his head, and I want to see how did he do it, why did he do it, if he did it a particular way, why does it work for this piece, why would it or would it not work for another piece. So I'm coming back in with some of this salmon-y color, and what you want to do when you use the salmon or any of these other mixes, make them thick, don't make them thin, because if you're going to come back while something is still wet, the last thing you want is stuff to run into each other, because you want those dots to stay pretty separate, you know, pretty separate from each other. So you can see that if you use the gouache thick, you come back almost immediately for analogous colors. Now for a color that's further away on the wheel, like blue, I'm going to wait till this dries, but because this is just a tint of this, it's you know, it's basically in the exact same family of reds, I can do this right now and not wait till I have to come back for later. But you can see how adding the white as well makes it so that you can see the shading start to develop on this, you know, so, and, alright, so now let's go for Seurat's amazing blue and yellow sky. So as I was showing you on this before, and if you went and googled this image, it's the Eiffel Tower by Georges Seurat, French neo-impressionist painter. We're going to go and get our yellow now, and it's a pastel orange that he has up there. So I'm going to make sure that I mix a pastel orange. I'm not going to go in there with my primary yellow because God knows I'm going to have to go back in there with white to cover it up. So I'm going to make a nice pastel yellow all the way over here. Very pastel. And just with the teeniest bit of warmth from here so that it looks orange. Looks like it could be a little bit more yellow. All this can be adjusted. And looks like he's got yellow and orange. So let's go and do some yellow first. So keep in mind that when I post the finished version on my Facebook or Instagram, and show it to you in the next stream, it's going to look a lot more polished than whatever we get done, because this is not going to be done until after the stream, I'm sure, just like the last piece. And that's because, again, I try to discuss as many of the techniques, and so while I'm discussing the pointillism and the divisionism, it gives me less time to actually do the pointillism. So I've got that, got the yellow going in the sky, and let's go and do, I think I managed to get all of the information relayed that I wanted to relay as far as technique. So let me do one more layer of blue down here. You can see a little bit of blue here, so that's what I'm doing now, because remember I said the value areas for this are darker in the right leg. So if you want to make sure that you follow his value scheme, that we go ahead and put the blue here. Now what I'm going to do, whether I get to this or not, I want to let you know that once this blue is dry, just like with the yellow sky, when I go back with more blue, come back with more red. So this isn't as blotchy in one area. You want to make sure that you eat out some of those blue dots. The more layers of this that you do, the more random and less aligned you will have it, because your hand has a tendency to poke in a systematic way. You tell it after a while that you're poking, it'll poke in a straight line more or less. So to avoid that straight line, come back and poke other colors around it numerous times, and not only does it give you that great mixing, but it throws off the look of a single line, you know? And you can also do it more consciously. So like if I wasn't talking, I could do it more consciously. But I'm trying to do both, and doing an okay job of it, but I'm definitely going to polish it more once I'm gone. Okay, do you see some lighter blue up here? So I'm going to take the opportunity to poke some blue here while I've got blue in my brush. And do some more blue up here while I've got some chance to do that. So it gets need to have more red here so it doesn't turn into a blue sky edge, because that's one of the reasons I'm sure he used a darker blue with the red. It's because even though he thought maybe the tower didn't need to go as dark at the very edge, it's the only thing separating it from the sky, is you can't just make it blue. And I'm going to recap what we are doing. So he was a neo-impressionist, worked in pointillism. He also was working with color theory, and he was really interested in the idea of optical mixing. So basically not mixing your colors on the palette, but putting down stuff in dots so that it ends up mixing beautifully as you back up away from it. And that's not just the shapes, but also the colors. And that's called chromoluminarism. It's also called divisionism. And when you do it just with the dots without the color, it's called stippling or pointillism. So that's what he was doing, and he died when he was really young, but he has these really famous paintings that he did, including Sunday Afternoon, the Eiffel Tower, and different ports and beaches and seascapes. And what we were doing today was trying to recreate a pastel piece in gouache of one of his oil paintings of the Eiffel Tower. And it is in an letter A composition, which is what I was talking about, rather than being something that follows the rule of thirds or the golden mean. He did this as a portrait of the Eiffel Tower, so therefore it follows a very symmetrical look. The letter A composition, coming in with a little bit of foliage on this side, which we didn't develop yet, and this diagonal line for this bridge, and also this building block right here keeps it from being perfectly asymmetrical and boring. And also he makes it so the darkest dark is right here, so that you have a focal point that leads you up through the tower, around the painting, and back in a circle when you have all of the different shapes in. So I hope you enjoyed me doing this, and I will make sure that I end on a decent note, because I don't know when that window is going to act up with the overexposure again, so I want to make sure everybody can see the painting before I leave. And thanks for coming, and I hope you subscribe to my Twitch channel and also to my YouTube watercolor and wizardry channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope until next time that you have some amazing painting adventures with me.